In a quiet town in Brazil, the lights of a simple home glowed against the night. Inside, Valdemir Huckler, a man who spent his days driving and raising cattle, was living what no one realized would be his last evening alive. That night, inside those walls, love, jealousy, and fear mixed in a way that led to something unthinkable. A choice was made, one that wouldn't just break a marriage, but would shatter an entire family. By the next morning, Valdemir had disappeared. For his children, it didn't make sense. He was a hard-working man with dreams and plans for the future. But within hours, rumors spread, police began to search, and the mystery started to unfold. What really happened in that house on November 14th? And how did a family story turn into one of betrayal and tragedy? If you're a fan of true crime and criminal investigations, you won't want to miss our new book, The Ultimate Book of Serial Killers: 180 Files of the World's Most Notorious Murderers, now available on Amazon. You can also purchase the PDF version directly from our website for instant download. You'll find the link in the video description and in a pinned comment. Now, let's dive into today's case. Valdemir Heckler was born in Brazil in 1979, though the exact date of his birth remains uncertain. He grew up in a large family, learning early the value of responsibility and hard work. By the time he reached adulthood, Valdemir was known in his community as a kind and dependable man. He earned a living as a driver and also ran a small livestock business, raising cattle in the countryside. Life seemed stable. He was married to Jeanette, a woman he loved deeply, and together they had built a family with two sons, Jonathan and Mateus. For a while, their home reflected the image of happiness. But when Mateus was barely a year old, that picture was shattered. Valdemir confessed to Jeanette that he had another relationship and another child. The woman was Claudia Fernandez Tabares, a former teacher who had once worked with dairy cattle. She had given birth to a daughter, Gabriela, just months after Mateus was born. The revelation devastated Jeanette. The betrayal cut deep, and for a time, she didn't know how to process the truth. But despite her pain, she chose not to pursue a divorce, holding on to the hope that Valdemir would one day abandon his double life and return fully to their home. In the meantime, Valdemir moved in for a time with Claudia to care for their baby daughter. Claudia, leaving her work behind, devoted herself to raising Gabriela. The situation grew even more complicated because the children themselves began to bond. Gabriela, as she grew, often visited Jonathan and Mateus. The siblings played together, creating innocent connections that contrasted with the tension between the adults. For Jeanette, however, life became a daily struggle. Claudia refused to let the family find peace. She followed them on the streets, spied on their movements, and constantly disrupted their routine. Even at family gatherings, Claudia's presence hovered like a shadow. On one occasion, as Valdemir drove Jeanette and their children to her mother's birthday party, Claudia appeared in her car, trailing them closely. The pursuit was so unsettling that Jeanette felt forced to hide in her own husband's vehicle to avoid being seen. For miles, Claudia shifted her car's position, ensuring she never lost sight of them. Only after a long stretch of tense driving did they finally manage to lose her. Jeanette would later describe it as an episode that bordered on madness. The confrontations didn't stop there. Claudia showed up at private homes where Valdemir and Jeanette tried to spend quiet evenings with friends. On more than one occasion, her sudden arrival forced Valdemir into hiding to avoid scandal. Her obsession with controlling him grew stronger, and she could not accept the fact that he continued to see Jeanette, the woman she saw as her rival. The harassment even extended into their most private spaces. Claudia called their home relentlessly, taking advantage of the fact that caller ID was not yet common. Anyone who picked up the phone, including Jeanette's mother, was met with threats, mockery, and cruel words. Claudia boasted about her relationship with Valdemir and demeaned Jeanette, claiming she was only useful for housework and that her husband felt disgust toward her. Yet, according to Jeanette, those words never matched the reality she lived with him. Eventually, the strain became unbearable. Exhausted and unable to tolerate the constant intrusion, Jeanette made a heartbreaking decision. She gathered Valdemir's belongings and left them at Claudia's door, effectively forcing him to leave their home. From that day forward, Valdemir lived with Claudia. Still, his ties to his sons remained. Jonathan and Mateus, growing into their teenage years, continued to see their father regularly. They shared outings, family meals, and moments that carried a sense of normalcy despite the turmoil between adults. Jeanette herself visited from time to time, and though the circumstances were strained, Valdemir always treated her with respect. Financially and emotionally, he continued to provide for his children, ensuring they never lacked support. As the years passed, the fractured family found a delicate balance. On certain weekends, they would even gather together for barbecues and celebrations, and in those moments, Valdemir's jovial spirit lit up the room. Known for his humor and easy laugh, he seemed to bring joy wherever he went. Jonathan built a family of his own, and like his younger brother, visited his father about once a month. Gabriella, however, chose a different path. When she turned 18, she moved out on her own. Her bond with her father grew distant, though she remained close to her mother, Claudia. By mid-2022, after decades of complications, Valdemir and Claudia finally formalized their relationship in marriage. Around this time, Valdemir was dealing with another profound change: the death of his father. The loss was heavy, and the division of inherited land among his siblings created fresh tensions within the extended family. Some assets and money were not directly under his name, but were managed through his sons and close associates. Despite the difficulties, Valdemir maintained a steady income as a driver, collected a pension, and continued with his livestock activities. He dreamed of investing his inheritance in more land and hoped to secure a future for his children. In early November of 2022, Jonathan, his wife, and their 3 young children visited the home where Valdemir now lived with Claudia. Despite Jonathan's lingering mistrust toward his father's new wife, whom he saw as strict and controlling, he kept relations cordial, choosing not to avoid her but to share family moments when necessary. That weekend, friends of the couple also joined the gathering. The atmosphere appeared calm, almost deceptively normal. The family laughed, ate together, and shared stories deep into the night. Jonathan and his family even decided to spend the night there. But the following week, Matthias and Jonathan noticed that their father had gone unusually quiet. By Tuesday, November 15th, 2022, concern grew into alarm. Valdemir failed to show up for work, a man who had always been punctual and responsible. His colleagues, unsettled by his absence, reached out to Claudia to ask if something had happened. Her answer was unexpected. She didn't know where he was. Within hours, she reported him missing to the local police. The news didn't come to Jeanette and her sons directly. Instead, a family acquaintance contacted them with the troubling update. For Jonathan, panic set in quickly. He feared his father might have fainted or suffered an accident while working in the fields. The family rushed to search the rural areas he often visited, but hours of effort led nowhere. Amid the uncertainty, rumors began to circulate through the community. Some whispered that Valdemir might have taken his own life, but his family firmly rejected the idea. They knew him as a cheerful man, full of plans and dreams for the future. He had financial stability, livestock to manage, and, most importantly, children he adored. Suicide, they insisted, was unthinkable. What seemed more plausible was that he had chosen to leave home temporarily, perhaps to escape mounting tensions with Claudia or to make a dramatic point, but no one could imagine the grim reality that was slowly coming to light. Jonathan and his wife decided to set aside their doubts and visit Claudia, hoping to support her in the search. That evening, the atmosphere around Claudia's home was already tense. Police cars, firefighters, and neighbors crowded the area, combing the surroundings for any sign of Valdemir. Jonathan searched through his father's phone, hoping to find a clue in his messages. Nothing explained his sudden disappearance. Claudia told those present that the previous weekend had been ordinary. She said they had eaten pizza with friends and spent Sunday together peacefully. According to her, nothing unusual had happened. To everyone listening, it sounded like a comforting version of events. But small details soon began to raise questions. That very night, Jonathan and his wife decided to stay in the house with Claudia. She refused to sleep in her bedroom, instead choosing to spend the night on the living room sofa. She claimed it was so she could be awake if her husband returned. From her spot, however, she had a clear view of the refrigerator. When Jonathan approached it for a glass of water, Claudia's reaction was strangely intense, as if the simple act of opening the fridge unsettled her. Jonathan dismissed it in the moment, attributing her behavior to stress and grief. Yet in the following days, Claudia remained oddly protective of that refrigerator. She wouldn't allow anyone else to open it, insisting on being the only one to hand out food to the many volunteers helping with the search. On Saturday, November 19th, 3 days after Claudia had filed the missing person report, she was called to the police station to provide a formal statement. Investigators did not yet view her as a suspect, but given her closeness to Valdemir, questioning her was inevitable. During the interview, officers couldn't help but notice visible injuries on her body. They looked like marks from some sort of struggle. When asked about them, Claudia agreed to undergo a forensic examination, but soon after leaving the station, she disappeared. Almost at the same time, the investigation took a startling new direction. A neighbor approached the authorities with a detail that would prove crucial. Something strange he had witnessed in those days, something that made him uneasy enough to finally speak up. Claudia's freezer was usually empty. Friends and neighbors knew it well. She rarely stocked it with more than a few essentials. But this time, when police entered her house, the freezer looked strangely full, packed with food items that no one recalled her buying. It was an odd detail, so odd that it immediately caught the attention of the investigators. Given the lack of progress in the search and the growing sense that this case was far from ordinary, they decided they could not overlook anything, no matter how absurd it seemed. That night, officers began removing the bags and packages stacked inside. With each layer they pulled away, a chilling reality began to emerge. Hidden beneath the frozen goods lay the lifeless body of Valdemir, just 43 years old, preserved in the cold and concealed in the very appliance Claudia had guarded so carefully. Preliminary findings suggested a grim scenario. Investigators believe Claudia had emptied the freezer, placed her husband's body inside, and then meticulously covered him with food to mask the crime. The discovery left the community in shock. Within hours, a warrant was issued for Claudia's arrest. As speculation spread, the search for Claudia seemed destined to be long and difficult. Yet the resolution was startlingly simple. Not long after the warrant was issued, she appeared at the police station herself. Before surrendering, she had even recorded a video that circulated on social media declaring that she would face whatever justice demanded. During interrogation, Claudia confessed to the crime. She claimed she had lived under constant threats, saying that Valdemir had repeatedly told her he would kill her. Convinced that he might eventually carry out those threats, she insisted she had acted in self-defense. According to her account, on the night of November 14, 2022, she gave her husband a sleeping pill. When he lost consciousness, she bound his limbs as though handling livestock, drawing on her past experience on dairy farms. At one point, she said she hesitated, realizing what she was about to do. But the thought of her own life and the safety of her daughter pushed her to continue. She admitted to suffocating Valdemir with a plastic bag. Claudia added further details to paint a picture of a man consumed by jealousy. She recalled an incident 2 weeks before when Valdemir had slapped her in public, an episode she claimed was the breaking point. On the night of the killing, she said, he had forbidden her from going out with co-workers to a New Year's celebration, again asserting his control. In her version, the murder was not premeditated revenge, but a desperate act of survival. Afterward, she told investigators, she felt something she had not felt in years: freedom. Her defense attorney echoed this narrative, portraying her as a woman subjected to years of psychological and physical abuse. In front of television cameras, Claudia repeated the same message. It had been him or her, and she had no choice. But the evidence told a different story. The marks on her body, the inconsistencies in her testimony, and above all, the horrifying concealment of the body in the freezer painted a far more sinister picture. Authorities charged Claudia, then 40 years old, with aggravated homicide, concealment of a corpse, and making false statements. As her face appeared across news portals and flooded social media feeds, the case sparked a national debate in Brazil about domestic violence, mental health, and the blurred lines between victimhood and responsibility. For Valdemir's family, however, no explanation could soften the blow. The discovery created an irreversible fracture in their lives. Jonathan, in particular, was haunted by one image. During those frantic days of searching, when he and his wife had stayed in Claudia's house, she had insisted on serving food herself. She never let anyone else open the freezer. At the time, he thought it was an odd habit, but nothing more. Now, with the truth revealed, he could not stop replaying the scene in his mind. While volunteers gathered in the house to help, Claudia had walked calmly to the refrigerator, pulling out meals from the very place where his father lay hidden, frozen in silence. For Gabriela, the revelation was unbearable. She had lost her father in the most unimaginable way, and at the same time, the woman accused of killing him was her own mother. Shock mixed with loyalty. Despite the horror, despite the accusations, she tried to stand by Claudia, clinging to the only parent she had left. Jeanette, Jonathan, and Mateus understood that Gabriela was facing the greatest loss of all. Whatever their own grief, they could not ignore that she was a young woman suddenly left without a father and with a mother in custody. Claudia, however, maintained her position. She told investigators that she had acted to protect her daughter. She claimed that Valdemir had been jealous of the bond she shared with Gabriella, and that the young woman's decision to move away from home had been motivated by the toxic environment created by her father. Meanwhile, the practicalities of death unfolded in slow motion. The grim process of defrosting Valdemir's body took several days. His wake had to be delayed, forcing relatives to endure a drawn-out agony. When the date of the funeral finally arrived, what should have been an intimate farewell became a public spectacle. The media descended on the ceremony, drawn by the shocking details of the case. Cameras flashed as neighbors, friends, and strangers crowded outside, their curiosity fueled by morbid fascination. For the grieving family, the intrusion only deepened their pain. As the investigation progressed, authorities reached a firm conclusion. Claudia had acted with premeditation. Yet a lingering question troubled both police and the public. Had she acted alone, or did she have help? Some suspected an accomplice, someone who might have assisted in moving or hiding the body. But according to the civil police, all evidence pointed to Claudia working by herself. Even Valdemir's family, who initially doubted that she could have managed it alone, came to agree. If she had had help, they reasoned, the body would have been disposed of in a more conventional way, perhaps abandoned in a car or hidden in the countryside. The strange decision to use the freezer seemed to confirm that she acted out of fear of being seen, improvising under pressure. The motive, however, remained a subject of debate. As investigators probed Valdemir's reputation, they uncovered conflicting stories. One of his sisters had filed a complaint against him, accusing him of violent behavior. Yet when examined closely, that accusation appeared to be connected to long-standing disputes over the division of inherited land rather than domestic abuse. At the same time, records showed that Claudia herself had filed a complaint for domestic violence back in 2019. The incident, according to reports, occurred during a heated argument about Gabriella's wish to leave home and study in another city, a decision her father strongly opposed. Claudia helped her daughter move without Valdemir's permission, and when he returned to discover what had happened, tensions erupted. Later, he also accused Claudia of taking a large sum of money from the house, funds he believed were meant to finance Gabriella's move. Claudia insisted he had taken it himself. For Jeanette, these allegations were deeply painful to hear. She remained firm in her belief that Valdemir had never been physically abusive toward Claudia, and she described him as a man who always provided for his family. Another disturbing detail emerged. Valdemir had been keeping large amounts of cash at home, money he intended to use to purchase a new piece of land. Friends testified that he had saved between $38,000 to $50,000 US at the time. One of his brothers even claimed to have seen the money with his own eyes. In addition, Valdemir often deposited sums into accounts belonging to relatives or trusted acquaintances. These revelations added weight to suspicions that Claudia's motives may not have been solely about fear or survival. Family members suggested that Claudia may not have meticulously plotted the crime, but rather nurtured the thought over time, waiting for the right moment. They believed she acted before Valdemir could install new security cameras in their home, cameras that would have limited her movements and perhaps exposed her behavior. In August 2023, the case returned to public attention when a court in Santa Catarina granted Claudia conditional release under electronic monitoring. She was allowed to work in a construction factory during the day and as a cook in a restaurant at night while awaiting trial. The decision provoked outrage among many who saw it as a failure of justice. Soon after, however, the Superior Court of Justice overturned the ruling, citing the severity of the crime, the concealment of the body, and her attempt to mislead investigators. Claudia was once again placed in preventive detention. Her lawyer, undeterred, continued to defend her under a contingency arrangement, promising to collect fees only if she were acquitted. He publicly expressed confidence that Claudia trusted his work completely. As of now, no trial date has been set. The case of Valdemir Höckler remains one of the most shocking in recent Brazilian history. For Valdemir's loved ones, the tragedy left a permanent scar. The man they had loved and relied upon was gone, hidden in a place no one could have imagined, while the woman who claimed to love him most stood accused of ending his life. And so, the final question lingers in the air. Was Claudia truly a victim pushed to the edge by years of abuse? Or was this the calculated act of someone consumed by control and resentment? What justice does a crime like this deserve? And will Brazil ever truly deliver it? Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.